You know how it is, you've got limited time. But this mountain of information you need to get through.
Exactly. That's where we try to help.
So today on the Deep Dive, we're tackling a whole collection of sources, actually, all centered around, well, a pretty crucial concept in healthcare. Care pathways.
Right, care pathways. You can think of them sort of like detailed roadmaps for how healthcare should ideally play out for specific conditions, maybe procedures.
Okay.
And we've pulled together quite a mix of stuff, foundational articles explaining, what they are, how they're built.
The basics?
Yeah, the basics, but then also real-world case studies looking at the challenges, say, in Indonesia.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and their role as a quality driver across Europe, a specific blueprint for cesarean sections, even how they're popping up in genomic medicine.
Wow. Okay, so a broad scope then.
Definitely.
So our mission today seems pretty straightforward. Let's try and distill the essence of care pathways. What are they? Fundamentally, why should we care?
And what happens when the rubber meets the road, The practical side.
Exactly, the complexities of actually using them.
Yeah.
Okay, let's dive in then. What exactly is a care pathway? How would you define it?
Well, at its absolute core, it's really about taking the best evidence we have, the best medical knowledge, and making sure it's actually used in the day-to-day delivery of care. So it's a structured plan.
Structured how?
Structured and multidisciplinary. It outlines, the steps in treating or managing a patient with a specific condition or who's having a certain procedure.
Okay.
The big goal, it's aiming for a level of standardization, but beneficial standardization, right? For a defined group of patients, usually within a specific hospital or clinic setting.
Right, so it's about getting that consistency, making sure everyone's following an effective approach based on solid knowledge. What are the non-negotiables, the must-have elements for a good care pathway?
Yeah, good question. There are several key things. First, you absolutely need clear goals and really specific steps. And these need to be grounded in, best clinical practices, the hard evidence. And this is crucial what patients themselves actually expect and need from their care.
Right, patient expectations, yeah.
Definitely. Second, a good pathway has to actively help communication. Make it clearer, more consistent.
Between who?
Between everyone, all the healthcare professionals involved, doctors, nurses, therapists, everyone, but also directly with the patients and their families, keeping them in the loop.
That makes total sense. Everyone on the same page, informed, coordinated. What else is essential?
Coordination, exactly. That's indispensable. So a well-designed pathway, it clearly defines who does what, the roles of each team member, and the best sequence for their activities all along the patient's journey.
Like a timeline.
Sort of, yeah, a sequence plan. And then you need a solid system for monitoring what's happening, carefully documenting the care, and really evaluating the outcomes. Are we achieving what we set out to achieve?
Makes sense. Measuring success.
Precisely. And finally, you've got to figure out the resources needed up front. Staff, equipment, time. Identifying and allocating those is key for it to actually work smoothly. Ideally, you're looking at these 4 criteria. Structured, multidisciplinary plan of care.
It sounds really comprehensive when you lay it all out, a very thoughtful framework. And these aren't just for, say, hospital operations, are they? They apply more broadly.
Oh, absolutely. Their potential is huge, really spans the whole healthcare spectrum.
Like what?
Everything. Preventive care, managing acute flare-ups, long-term chronic conditions, even palliative care towards the end of life.
Right.
And across all these, the focus is always on boosting effectiveness, making things safer for patients, and making sure the care is genuinely patient-centered, tailored to their needs.
Okay, to make this less abstract, maybe we could look at some concrete examples. How do these pathways actually function in different medical areas?
Yeah, good idea. Let's take mental health. Now, coordinating different specialists, counselors, doctors, psychologists, that's part of it, sure. But the main goal for pathways in mental health, maybe for things like depression or anxiety, is improving the patient's overall mental well-being.
Right.
So the pathway might detail, the reason for the visit, the symptoms, what diagnostic tools to use, clear pointers on when to bring in different experts, the right referral routes, the best treatments at each stage, and really importantly, building in regular checks on how the patient is progressing.
So it maps out that whole journey from initial concern right through to ongoing support. What about something physical, like, say, a bad back, musculoskeletal issues?
Right. For musculoskeletal conditions, a typical pathway often starts with the primary care doc, the GP. If things need a closer look, the pathway gives criteria for referral to a specialist. Then in secondary care, it might involve imaging, maybe other tests, devices, physio, injections.
Okay.
What's really interesting, or maybe worrying, is that without these pathways, you often see huge variations in how people with the same back problems, say, get managed depending on where they live.
Right.
Yeah, and that can lead to worse outcomes. So pathways aim to bring in that consistency, that standardization, to fix that.
Ah, okay. So it's about ensuring everyone gets a reliable, high standard of care, no matter the postcode. We also saw something about genomic medicine pathways that sounds very cutting edge.
It really is. These are often structured quite linearly, sort of mapping onto the patient's journey when genomics becomes relevant.
How so?
Well, the initial focus tends to be on areas where using genomics is likely to have the biggest, most immediate impact on diagnosis or treatment.
Right.
And then these bigger pathways get broken down into smaller, more focused component pathways, often just 3 to 5 key steps.
Like what, for example?
Okay, so take a component pathway for requesting testing. The steps might be: 1, figure out which patients actually fit the bill for genomic testing.
To stratify them.
Exactly, stratify. 2, decide on the most appropriate specific test or panel. 3, double-check the genes you're interested in are actually on that panel.
Important detail.
Crucial. 4, get proper informed consent from the patient. And 5, the practical bit, actually request the test.
That lays it out very clearly, very practical. And the material on C-sections, that also mentioned a specific model. What was driving the need for that?
Well, you see C-section rates going up in some places, but not necessarily seeing a parallel improvement in quality of care or efficiency. So clinical pathways become super important there for both effectiveness, quality control, and efficiency, managing the costs.
Right.
So researchers developed this prototype model using what they called a 4D approach.
4D.
Yeah. Define the scope, design the pathway, develop the tools, and then disseminate it, get it out there.
Okay.
And it also uses Don Abedian's quality care framework, looking at structure, process, and outcome for C-sections.
Got it.
So key bits of this pathway include mapping out pre-op, the operation itself, post-op activities. Then there's a method for calculating indirect costs using activity-based costing.
Activity-based costing. Sounds technical.
It is a bit, yeah. It breaks down all the overheads tied to the procedure. Then they analyze efficiency using break-even point analysis, like how many do you need to do to cover costs?
Ah, good.
And finally, assessing effectiveness, looking closely at the procedures and the outcomes.
So it's really digging into the clinical side and the financial and quality assurance side. Now we've got a clearer picture of the what. Let's get to the why. What are the main benefits, the big goals of actually putting these pathways in place?
The upsides can be pretty significant. Primarily, they're aiming to really improve how healthcare services are managed overall and optimize how we use resources, staff time, money, equipment, make the most of them.
Efficiency, yeah.
Exactly. And by making clinical practice more consistent, they definitely help in controlling healthcare costs. But ultimately, the biggest goals are getting the best possible outcomes for patients.
Right.
And ensuring their journey through the healthcare system is as smooth and well-coordinated as possible.
So better care, smarter resource use, maybe saving some money. That sounds like a win-win-win.
It can be, absolutely. Pathways help you monitor standards of care continuously, which leads directly to better treatment quality, and patients tend to be more satisfied too. They act as a kind of prompt, a reminder for staff about best practices.
Right.
And they're also a great tool for evaluating how a patient is doing throughout their care.
And for the patient.
For patients, it means clearer guidance. They understand what to expect, what's coming next.
Less confusion.
Exactly. And for staff, having these protocol-based standard workflows can actually reduce confusion, cut down on variations in practice that shouldn't be there, and, just make things run more efficiently.
It really does sound like a system with benefits all around. But, as always, the big ideas often hit roadblocks when you try to implement them.
That's the tricky part.
We saw the article on Indonesia highlighted some pretty big hurdles. What were some of the main obstacles they ran into?
Yeah, that systematic review from Indonesia was quite revealing. It showed a bunch of challenges, often interconnected, one of the biggest. Just the significant shift required in how healthcare professionals think and work. Their established attitudes, their ingrained habits.
Culture change is hard.
It really is.
Yeah.
And then there were major management issues, leadership support, or lack thereof, getting the necessary resources, the whole organizational culture.
I can imagine pushback, too. Maybe doctors feeling like their autonomy is threatened.
That's a really sharp point, yeah. Physician autonomy was definitely a concern. Some felt standardization might not allow enough flexibility for patients who don't fit the standard mold,
Right.
the variability.
Right. Every patient is different.
Exactly. And then there were practical things like the pathway forms themselves being clunky or badly designed.
Literally hard to use.
Yeah, inconsistent terms, maybe the boxes were too small, just basic usability problems getting in the way.
So the tools have to be right. What about the people involved? The staff?
Huge issues there, too. Not enough trained staff sometimes. Poor communication between different teams or disciplines.
Silos.
Classic silos, yeah. And sometimes just a lack of awareness about what the pathways were for, what the benefits were meant to be, and the challenge of getting clinicians to follow the pathway when their own judgment, maybe based on habit, told them otherwise, even when a pathway existed.
Right.
And interestingly, one key finding was that initiatives started from the bottom up.
Oh, yeah.
Driven by enthusiastic teams on the ground. They tended to stick better, be more successful than things just imposed from the top down.
That makes a lot of sense. You need that buy-in from the people actually doing the work. What about the role of hospital leadership, the managers? How crucial are they in making this work or not work?
Oh, absolutely critical.
Yeah.
Hospital leadership and management, they need to be fully aware and, more importantly, fully committed. They need to develop clear strategic policies that actively support using care pathways. Without that strong backing, that policy framework, well, pathways can just fizzle out. They lack legitimacy.
Some policy matters.
Hugely. And those policies need to be applied consistently, right across the board, at every level.
And it's not just about writing policies and walking away, I assume.
No way. Active involvement is key.
Yeah.
Leadership needs to set up effective multidisciplinary teams, the people who will actually develop, review, audit these pathways. Though the research did flag a challenge there, keeping those teams proactive if they weren't given dedicated time and resources for pathway work.
Right. It becomes just another task.
Exactly. And proactive leadership also means investing in staff education, training workshops, getting people involved early in designing the pathways so they feel some ownership.
Yeah.
Maybe even reward systems for following best practice. And the role of case managers came up strongly too, having dedicated people to oversee and support pathway use. That was seen as vital.
Wow. It sounds like a really sustained, detailed effort is needed. From a big picture policy right down to the nitty-gritty of forms and team meetings. What about the pathways themselves? From an implementation view, what makes a pathway good?
Well, the initial development is fundamental. You can't skip that. It needs super careful attention.
Okay.
You have to consider all the essential bits, clinical, administrative. It has to be based on the best evidence and guidelines available.
Right.
It needs to be communicated clearly to everyone who'll use it. And importantly, you need broad agreement, consensus from the whole multidisciplinary team.
Makes sense.
But even after all that hard work, you can still get patchy use, non-compliance, so you absolutely need robust monitoring and evaluation systems.
How can we implement that?
Often with things like checklists, tracking key indicators, are the forms being completed properly? Are there big variations in how the service is delivered compared to the pathway? What's happening with length of stay? Things like that. But a common grumble, and it's a fair one, was that pathways sometimes felt like extra work, especially if it meant documenting the same thing twice, once for the pathway, once for the regular notes, double documentation.
Yeah, that's a real barrier. If it feels like more bureaucracy without a clear payoff, people won't engage. Okay, let's shift gears slightly. Europe. Pathways have been around there for a while, right? Since the 80s.
That's right. Yeah, widespread use since the 1980s. And the emphasis there has consistently been on taking broad clinical guidelines and actually translating them into the specific ways things are done locally in individual hospitals or clinics.
Okay.
The big goals: maximizing patient safety and making care delivery more efficient. And you see lots of different initiatives.
Like what?
Well, there's the Belgian-Dutch Clinical Pathway Network, BDCP. In the Netherlands, they have the Faster Better program and the Lean Network in Healthcare, LADZ. Germany has its Society for Clinical Process Management, DGKPM.
Right.
Even in Bulgaria, their hospital payment system is built around something they call clinical pathways.
So lots of activity across Europe. What does the evidence say? Have they actually worked as a quality strategy there?
Well, a big systematic review looked at this. It found that, yes, pathways definitely have the potential to boost quality and efficiency. But the evidence on consistently successful implementation is a bit sparse, and it varies a lot. What works well in one place might not in another.
Ah,
The review really hammered home that success depends on understanding what helps and what hinders adoption in a specific setting. You need that engagement from both clinicians and managers, and your implementation strategy has to be tailored really specific to the local context.
so that theme again. Context matters, engagement matters. No one-size-fits-all approach. Okay, let's circle back to the C-section example. That research really focused on cost control and quality. Why the dual focus there?
Well, with those rising C-section rates we mentioned, often without clear proof of better outcomes or more efficiency, especially in systems like Indonesia's INA CBGs, where hospitals get a fixed payment per case. Well, getting both the quality and the cost right becomes absolutely critical.
Makes sense. Survival almost.
Pretty much. So pathways are seen as vital tools for tackling both effectiveness and cost management there. The research focused on building models to do just that, calculating unit costs carefully, reviewing procedures and outcomes, evaluating efficiency and effectiveness.
And what did they find about the costs? Were they consistent?
Not at all. They found significant, sometimes surprising differences in unit costs between government and private hospitals.
Why?
It highlighted how much things like direct costs, doctor incentives, supplies, and indirect cost management infrastructure varied, and also how different costing methods affected the final number.
Okay.
And those findings fed directly into that prototype cost and quality control model using the 4D approach again and Dunabedian's framework. It maps out the whole C-section process, uses that activity-based costing for indirect costs, break-even analysis for efficiency, and then looks hard at procedures and outcomes for effectiveness.
A really detailed breakdown, clinically and financially. Was the model any good? Did experts like it?
Yes, they did. Expert validation confirmed it was clear, coherent, and highly relevant as a practical tool.
Yeah.
The takeaway for hospitals was pretty clear. Implementing models like this could really help them avoid financial losses and ensure high-quality, evidence-based care.
Strong argument for adopting them then.
Yeah.
Okay, finally, let's revisit genomic medicine. That feels moving so fast. What's the main aim of creating pathways there?
Yeah, it's evolving incredibly quickly. The main goal is really to give healthcare professionals manageable, clinically relevant ways to actually use genomic medicine in their day-to-day work.
Making it practical.
Exactly. These pathways are based on approved resources from the UK's NHS Genomic Medicine Service, the GMS. And they tend to start with high-level patient pathways in areas where genomics is expected to make the biggest difference soonest. The strategy is to break these down into smaller component pathways, like one for ordering a test, one for giving results back.
Right. Bite-sized chunks.
Precisely. And then simplify those into just, say, 3 to 5 essential actionable steps.
Can you walk us through those steps again for the requesting testing example?
Sure. The steps might look like this. First, stratify the patient, figure out if testing is clinically indicated based on their presentation history.
Okay.
Second, decide which specific genomic test or panel is the right one to order. Third, if it's a panel, double-check the genes you care about are actually included. Seems obvious, but crucial.
Yeah.
Fourth, get informed consent. Make sure the patient understands what it involves, the potential outcomes.
Right.
And fifth, the practical step. Complete the request form, send it off to the lab.
Very clear, very actionable, a good guide for clinicians. Are there specific pointers on when to even think about ordering genetic testing?
Yes, definitely. Clinicians should consider it in cases like unexplained intellectual disability, especially if there are other features like behavior issues or unusual growth, or if there are dysmorphic features, unusual physical traits, or, of course, a significant family history of a genetic condition.
Right.
And it's absolutely vital they check the official test directory for eligibility criteria. Does the patient meet the requirements for this specific test? And select the right panel based on the clinical picture.
Got it.
And you need that record of discussion. Form proof you've had the conversation about pros and cons with the patient, and, of course, the right type of sample. Blood, saliva, whatever's needed.
It really keeps coming back to having that well-defined, structured, evidence-based process, doesn't it? Guiding decisions, ensuring consistency. Okay, so pulling this all together, if a hospital or clinic wants to develop and implement pathways, maybe across different services, are there general steps they should follow, a kind of toolkit approach?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a general process. Fundamentally, it's about creating a systematic link between, say, patient health indicators, the administrative side of things, and the clinical interventions themselves.
Okay.
The typical steps usually go something like this. First, identify the specific patient group the pathway is for. Second, assign a dedicated interdisciplinary team to lead the work. Can't be done in isolation.
Right.
Third, that team needs to research the evidence-based guidelines, the best practices for that group.
Do the homework.
Exactly. Fourth, map out how things are done now, the current state. Find the inefficiencies, the confusion, the variations.
Okay.
Fifth, based on the evidence in that current state map, define the ideal state. What should it look like?
The target.
The target, yeah. Sixth, document the detailed pathway, protocol, clinical steps, admin processes like documentation, team meetings, billing, all of it.
Get it written down.
Clearly. Seventh, test the protocol before rolling it out everywhere. Yeah. A pilot study, maybe using a plan to study X cycle, get feedback, refine it.
Test and learn.
Definitely. And finally, eighth, implement the refined pathway more broadly.
That sounds like a very logical, systematic process. Any key tips or best practices for making each of those steps successful?
Well, that interdisciplinary team is crucial. Make sure you've got clinical folks, finance, IT, quality improvement people involved.
Right.
And definitely get input from patients and other stakeholders. Don't forget them.
Good point.
Mapping the current state properly is vital for knowing where the problems actually are. Defining the ideal state. Stick to the evidence. Documenting everything clearly means everyone's on the same page. Pilot testing, absolutely invaluable for catching problems early.
Right.
And you need a culture of continuous quality improvement. Keep monitoring process and outcomes long term. It's not a one-and-done thing. Oh, and involving patients in the change process itself can make a huge difference to buy-in and effectiveness.
This has been, well, incredibly insightful, a really thorough deep dive into care pathways. So for everyone listening today, what's the main thing they should take away from all this?
I think the central message is that care pathways, they're really valuable, potentially powerful tools for structuring healthcare, for improving it. But as we've seen, making them work successfully is, well, it's complicated. It's multifaceted.
Yeah.
It needs sustained attention to lots of different things, clear definitions, real multidisciplinary collaboration, tackling those practical challenges we talked about, and really getting that buy-in, making sure everyone understands and supports the process.
Yeah, and for me, the real aha moment, I guess, is seeing that while the basic idea, a structured approach, sounds simple enough.
Right.
Actually doing it means navigating all these complex organizational dynamics, dealing with individual concerns about autonomy or workload, and needing this constant cycle of adaptation, learning, and refining based on feedback.
Precisely. And that, it raises a really interesting question for our listeners to maybe chew on.
Okay.
How could these core principles behind successful care pathways, that structured, evidence-based approach to complex processes, how might they apply to other complex systems outside healthcare? Oh, interesting.
To improve efficiency, get better outcomes, think about that balance you have to strike, between standardization, which pathways promote, and the need for personalization in almost any system. Where's the sweet spot?
That is a fascinating thought to ponder. Taking these lessons beyond just healthcare. And for anyone listening who wants to dig deeper, we definitely encourage you to explore the specific types of care pathways that might be relevant to your own field or interests.
Absolutely.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.